There are very few pristine places left on this planet. I became aware of one such place, a forest in Central Africa called the Ndoki, in 1995. And I can remember that day as if it was yesterday. I picked up a magazine and it referred to this forest as the last place on Earth. And I knew from that moment on that my life would change dramatically. You see, I had always wanted to study chimpanzees in Africa. Starting at a young age, I wrote most of the field scientists conducting studies on chimpanzees. Very few responded, and none of them led to opportunities after I graduated from college. But when I picked up this magazine article, I realized that this was the place I should be studying chimpanzees. And when the park director responded favorably to me coming out, I promptly quit my job as a zookeeper, bought a plane ticket, and I was off to Africa. And there's a sense of urgency, and that's because mechanized logging was moving into these regions at a rapid rate. With mechanized logging, it often acts as a gateway activity. Humans move into the area, roads come in, and populations of wildlife decrease rapidly, including chimpanzees. Today, we're going to take you on our journey. It's full of adventure, adversity, discoveries, and even a bit of romance. When I first arrived at the Ndoki, I found it teeming with wildlife. Forest elephants, they're often referred to as the architects of the rainforest. Bongo, they're Africa's largest forest antelope, one of its most elusive as well. And western lowland gorillas. And western lowland gorillas, they live in a completely different habitat than mountain gorillas do that we know a lot about. And then chimpanzees. But what was particularly important about this area was a place called the Goualougo Triangle. It was called the inner sanctum of all the conservation efforts in this region. And the chimpanzees in this area were known as for their local legendary status. They had never seen humans before. They had extreme tool use, and they even had fire. So I immediately promptly went out to these forests with not much more than a backpack and a pair of borrowed binoculars. And many people were skeptical of this study, not lasting much longer than a few months. I wasn't affiliated with a PhD program. I had never studied chimpanzees in the wild before. And we had very little funds to do the work. But I immediately started making these incredible observations, and it was clear this was an important area. And particularly because this area had not been included onto the Nouabalé-Ndoki National Park. So its future was very uncertain. Mechanized logging was slated for this area. So we were there to try to help document, help protect it. I quickly realized at that time that I couldn't do it on my own. And as fate would have it, a National Geographic photographer came out at that time, and with him, he carried a letter from a graduate student at Washington University in St. Louis. And she was interested in studying chimpanzees. And this was pretty cool for me because now I was receiving letters. And this was my first contact with Crickette Sanz.
Before traveling to Northern Republic of Congo, I would have said that I absolutely did not believe in love at first sight. And then I met the chimpanzees of the Goualougo Triangle. And I gotta tell you, I fell head over heels in love. And the guy studying them wasn't so bad either. But I had heard as a graduate student about this new study site where they were making remarkable observations of wild chimpanzees. They'd never seen humans before, and I thought, well, this guy, he's gotta be exaggerating to get funding, or he's just been in the forest way too long. I'm gonna go check it out. So I arrived in the Goualougo Triangle being a skeptic, but I was greeted by facial expressions like this. And it doesn't take an advanced degree to see that this chimpanzee looks surprised to see humans. And they responded in other ways. Instead of fleeing as if they'd been hunted or experienced poaching like many other chimpanzee populations had, these chimpanzees actually came in closer to look at us with curiosity and interest. It was a magical time. We would meet two chimpanzees, and they would call out to their friends as if to say, "Oh my goodness, you have to come check out these apes. They've got no hair, they're walking around on two legs, they've got binoculars and tripods and everything else." So we were out there witnessing these remarkable behaviors and also starting to see some of their unique cultural behaviors, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And we realized the vulnerability of this ape population and that we had to do as much as we could to protect them. So I want to take a moment to put these chimpanzees in a broader context. This is a map of the distribution of chimpanzees across equatorial Africa. The different highlighted areas show you the subspecies ranges, and the labels indicate places where chimpanzees have been studied for several decades. You've probably heard about chimpanzees in East Africa. The pioneering Jane Goodall has been studying them for more than 60 years. And from this site, we learned about the tool-using abilities of wild chimpanzees. Really, they're second only to humans in their technological prowess. But researchers were surprised a couple years later when they started study sites in West Africa, and they found a completely different tool-using tradition. These chimpanzees didn't use those flexible probes to extract termites from their nests, as Jane had documented. Instead, they used stone and wooden hammers and anvils to crack open nuts. And their tool-using traditions were just one aspect of their broader fabric of cultural behaviors. These are behaviors that are passed on from one individual to the next over generations, and they're important components of their community membership. We knew nothing about such behaviors in Central Africa until Dave Morgan launched the Goualougo Triangle Study Site in this region that's highlighted. And you can see the star is perfectly located to be able to document behaviors that had never been seen before. So discoveries were just waiting to be made if we could just get glimpses of these apes. So when I arrived in Goualougo, I realized why such endeavors had not previously been undertaken. To say that living conditions were basic is an understatement. This is basically the extent of our first forest camp. You can see it's not much more than a tarp slung over a sapling. You can see we cooked over an open campfire, and there's a couple pots there. One contains sardines and tomato sauce, and the other manioc. We would eat that night and also the next morning, day in and day out. But honestly, some of the fondest memories in my life come from these small forest camps. We'd go out at the crack of dawn looking for wild chimpanzees. We would see elephants and get charged, pass by a venomous snake, come back in the evening completely exhausted, and tell stories around the campfire about what we'd seen that day. It was one such evening. We were exhausted, about to retire for the night, and David grabbed a bucket of water. He doused the fire, and as the embers were smoldering, we sat in complete pitch blackness for just a few seconds before the forest floor erupted in the most beautiful, brilliant green glow. As far as the eye could see, these little sparkles ignited. And it was as if we were on a Martian landscape. We couldn't believe it. We looked at each other in amazement, and we asked the local guide, "What is this phenomenon that we're seeing? What's happening all around us?" And he said, "Well, this is the second thing you said you wanted to see in the Goualougo Triangle. This is the fire of the chimpanzees." This bioluminescent fungus that was the fire of the chimpanzees was just one such discovery that we would make with the help of the local indigenous people, the Bayaka. These are semi-nomad forest foragers that have lived in these forests their entire lives. David and I have often commented to each other, although we were studying for our doctoral degrees, it's really these individuals that deserve the PhDs. They are experts in ecology and botany, and their traditional knowledge is truly extraordinary. And without their mentorship over the years, we never would have had so much success in this project. So we owe them a great deal.
Now, the chimpanzees at that time were accustomed to us observing them in the canopy, but they weren't quite yet ready for us to follow them on the ground to see how they were using these tools at these termite mounds. So we had to get creative. And we came up with the idea of building a chimcam, passive infrared cameras that the chimpanzees, when they arrive at these termite mounds, they would film themselves. At that point, nobody had used cameras to observe chimpanzee behavior, and many people were skeptical. But we were determined to get these observations. And you can imagine the first week after placing these cameras out, our anticipation. And the trackers, Crickette and I, we were anxious to see what we had obtained. Did we get the chimpanzee tool-using behaviors? These are the observations that we first obtained. Wasn't exactly what we were hoping for, but it's nonetheless, it highlights how diverse habitat and enriched environments wild animals can live in. Pigs, leopards. But the chimpanzees did eventually come, and a mother and a juvenile arrived at this termite mound. This is the first footage we obtained, and it's looking good. They've brought tools with them. And just like humans, they're incredibly curious about their environment. So this juvenile male, he's investigating the camera. The mother comes up, and the trackers at this point were all engaged in this footage. And they're also quite flexible, the chimpanzees, with their tool-using behavior. There are not many other species in the animal kingdom that would investigate a novel object in their environment with a tool, like the chimpanzees. Many sites around Africa now are using these type of cameras to observe chimpanzee behavior.
We were eventually able to document the behavior we were looking for, and here Griffin is showing us how to fish for termites like a chimpanzee in the Congo Basin. You can see he's threading in the fishing probe very carefully and extracting it with the termites attached. Now he's taking great pains to arrange the end of that brush, and I'll talk about that more in a moment because it's a special modification made by chimpanzees in this region. Now Teresa is going to show us how to use a tool set. This is 2 tools to achieve a single goal. So her first tool is a perforating twig, and you can see that she's using that to open the surface of the nest. The termites create exit tunnels, and she's just got to open the first few centimeters of soil. Now she's threading in the second tool, which is used to actually extract the termites from the nest. Now these behaviors are incredibly rare within any animals, even among chimpanzees, the use of 2 tools to achieve a common goal. But here we're going to see another example. In this case, to harvest subterranean termites that actually live in underground cavities. So this mother, she's got a stout stick that she's inserting into the ground, and it's not easy work. You can see she's using her foot to get leverage of her body weight to push that tool into the ground to actually create a tunnel into the termite nest. She needs a second tool, tries to take it from her young daughter, and her daughter refuses. She'll probably like to termite fish later. So she approaches her adolescent son, who's happily termite fishing, and she takes the tool away from him. So now she's got the 2 tools that she needs to accomplish this task. She returns, she extracts the puncturing tool, and she carefully threads in this fishing probe to extract the termites. 2 totally different types of tools needed to accomplish this task. Here comes her son. He'd like the fishing probe back. You can see he whimpers. He extends his hand in a gesture. Mom returns the tool and takes the opportunity to take the tool from her young daughter. So you can see that these are active centers of social learning where information is transferred from one individual to the next. Now I want to return for a moment to that special modification to the fishing probes that we see in this region. And you can see that highlighted in this picture. There's a frayed end on one side of the tool. Now this isn't a byproduct of use. This is actually an intentional pre-modification that's made before the tool is ever inserted into the termite nest. And what we found is that this brush tip modification increases its efficiency by more than 10 times. You get 10 times as many termites with a brush tip tool as opposed to a non-brush tip tool. So some innovative chimpanzee in the Goualougo Triangle invented the brush tip fishing probe, and it caught on because it was so effective. We have very, very few examples of cumulative evolution within the animal kingdom, and this example comes from the Goualougo Triangle. I would now like to show you another behavior that we captured for the first time on film in the Goualougo Triangle. This is a mother. She's using a large club to pound open a beehive. And you can see the bees swarming around her. What you can't see in this footage is she's actually 5 stories high in the forest canopy, risking her life and expending a lot of energy to gather honey from this beehive. This is something that's incredible. It's one of my favorite behaviors of all the 20 different types of tool behaviors that we've observed, because the chimpanzees are so persistent and because they get so excited when they get the honey. And I can tell you, after months of a bland diet in the forest environment, you'll do pretty much anything to satisfy your sweet tooth.
People around the world are interested to hear about the complex community ties and the rich social lives of the chimpanzees. They're also quite surprised to hear that they mourn the dead of individuals in their community. This slide here is difficult for me to observe, and that's because this is Casey. He's 6 months old, and he's clinging to the chest of his dead mother, Caroline. And any time an individual in this community dies, we go at great length to figure out what the root cause of death is. And that's because it's very important in this region. Recently, Central Africa was dubbed the capital of emerging diseases. And so here Crickette is sampling Caroline's carcass. This is one of the first times we had done this out in the Goualougo Triangle. And this is important work. A mere 200 kilometers south of where we work, Ebola has erupted on many occasions, and it's killed thousands, if not tens of thousands, of chimpanzees and gorillas, and even local human populations as well. What's important about this in our memory is that when Crickette and I were talking around the campfire that night, she revealed to me that when she looked down at Caroline, she did not see the face of a dead chimpanzee. She saw the face of a friend, an individual who had taught us a lot about being a chimpanzee out in the Goualougo Triangle. We suspected another culprit was the root cause of death, and when we placed a chimp cam at Caroline's carcass, this is the footage we obtained later that day. It's a forest leopard, and it reminds us that this is a healthy, intact ecosystem, the Goualougo Triangle, and chimpanzees, they inhabit these forests with top predators, such as forest leopards. They also inhabit these forests with many non-human primates as well. And up until this point, we've been ignoring the 400-pound gorilla in the room. And that's quite hard to do out in the Goualougo Triangle. When you contact a silverback or adult male gorilla in the forest, it usually results in an explosive display, a charge that brings the male very close to you. It's a contact you're unlikely to forget. We have these type of contacts on a daily basis when we're following the chimpanzees. And this runs contrary to what most researchers suspect about chimpanzees and gorillas. They suspect they actively avoid each other in the forest. But when we walk out in these forests, we'll sometimes see, on common occasions, a silverback and a chimpanzee in the same tree feeding on the same resources. Our observations are changing our perceptions of how chimpanzees and gorillas inhabit such forests. This is Macallan, and Macallan is the first individual we came to know in contact out in the Goualougo Triangle. And during the course of this study, his life has changed dramatically. After years of lobbying and working with the government, providing scientific information, and also working with the local logging company, the Goualougo Triangle was annexed onto the national park by presidential decree in 2012, permanently protecting this forest. Yes, it's one of the rare opportunities of a conservation success story in these regions. And so these forests are permanently protected. And during the notes of that meeting, it was said that the Goualougo was very important in terms of chimpanzee research and also opportunities for Congolese. Crickette and our lives have changed dramatically as well. We started out as just Crickette and I, our team, but now we have over 30 people working on our project, individuals from local villages as well as graduates from the only university in the Republic of Congo. These are aspiring conservationists, and several of them have obtained master's degrees. One of them is pursuing a PhD program. And this is Congo's first generation of Congolese, and we're very humbled to be a part of such work. Crickette and I's lives have changed dramatically as well. We've faced adversity. We've come up with new ideas, novel techniques to study chimpanzees, new methods. And it's remarkable, but when I first arrived out in Goualougo, or left, my parents were skeptical that going to the last place on earth, I would actually encounter somebody that I would end up marrying. But we did. So today we want to leave you with one question, and that is, what is your journey? Is it to study chimpanzees in a remote forest? Is it to volunteer at a community center? Or is it to raise a family? Whatever your journey is, We hope you find it as fulfilling and as enriching as we found ours. Thank you.